Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Gantt-Sorenson with Haynsworth, Sinkler Boyd Law Firm, and we are excited to talk to you today about politics in the workplace. A short 2 weeks before the election, less than 2 weeks. Maybe we should have talked about it before, but we've got some great information for employers and some possible policies and just some things to consider in regards to politics in the workplace. And we're excited to be here today. Next slide. So typical process, next slide, about when you have Q&A, chat, or any sort of comments you want to make, put them in the chat box and or the Q&A box, and we will get to them as we get through the presentation. Afterwards, as always, you'll get an email from Keely or Raven, the marketing department, about your credits, whether they be HRCI, SHRM, or CLE credits, as well as the slides and the video of the presentation for watching it again as if once was not enough. Next slide. All right, so Keely has come up with some really great polling questions that we want to ask you today before we get started. And so go ahead and look at these and read them and answer. The first one, how often are political topics discussed in your workplace? And that can be informally or formally. All right. The responses to that, Keely, do you want me to do that or do you want to do it?
Do you see them?
Yes, you want me to do it?
Great. I can do that. So our responses on are political topics discussed in your workplace? Overwhelmingly, occasionally, with 88%, then frequently with 8%, and just a couple of folks with never. We'll do the next one. One second.
Next question. Do you believe discussing politics at work is beneficial or harmful to the workplace environment?
Got some stronger opinions on that one. All right, so 65% say harmful to the workplace environment, 30% neutral, and just 5% beneficial. So next one.
Interesting.
Oops. User error, sorry.
Happens to me all the time. You less so. Next question. Does your organization have a policy regarding political discussions at work?
So overwhelmingly no. The majority say no. We have 4 folks who have said yes, 10% said yes. All right.
Next question. Have you ever witnessed a conflict at work due to political discussions?
So again,
Wow.
yeah, a lot with the yes, they've witnessed that, 59% to 41% no.
Wow.
Kind of getting everybody ready for the all of the survey results. I feel like one of the newscasters.
Yes.
Last one.
Do you feel comfortable expressing your political views at work?
So again, no, the majority do not feel comfortable. And then 61% no, 36% sometimes.
Yeah.
Just one person with yes.
Yeah. Wow. And not surprised. At least I'm not anyway. Yeah. A lot of that, I think, depends on if you think the majority of like people in power have the same political opinion as you, which is sort of my genesis for this whole presentation. So let's pop on and see what some of the more national and regional surveys say. And thank you, y'all. That was fun. That was really fun. So Zeddy says 83% of the people say they have discussed politics at work. The Pew Research Fund study said 61%, which is about in line with some of what we said for some of our percentages. I'm trying to remember what the percentages were, Keely, if you have them, of what was harmful, but Pew's was 61, found it stressful and frustrating to have political discussions at work. Do you remember what ours was, or do you have that? I
Yes.
tried to retain it. Okay, good.
Feel 61% of ours said that they do not feel comfortable expressing their views.
And what about harmful or beneficial?
1 second. 65% say it's harmful.
Yeah, okay, so almost right in line. There was one that said 88%. I can't remember what. I should have written them down. All right, next slide. Another survey of 1,000 adults, approximately 70% plus want political neutrality in the workplace ahead of 2024 elections. 60% say companies need to avoid even the appearance of political involvement in the workplace. And 8 of 10 Americans believe businesses play a role in encouraging free and fair elections, which I think is fascinating. Resume Help's 2024 survey of 1,000 workers, 59% believe their managers' political beliefs influence their management style and or decisions. 25% have left a job or wanted to leave their job because of their boss's political beliefs. And 57% of women reported feeling a negative impact from talking politics at work compared to 44% of men. SHRM's 2024 research study said 57% of the workers say they've experienced or witnessed incivility at work within the past week. 34% say they believe the November election will trigger additional incivility in the workplace. And this was on top of the 20% of workers who already said they'd been mistreated by their coworkers or peers due to their political views. And then here is a graphic about workplaces encouraging or discouraging or saying nothing about respectful political discussions. And you can see 62% say none. And I think this did about track what our poll showed. 21% encouraged and 17% discouraged. So that was interesting, a fun participation with you all as well as these additional surveys. So let's talk about it a little bit, about what we can talk about and what we need to think about in the workplace. Next slide. So here are some of the day-to-day issues that you as HR or employers face. Employees' beliefs about free speech. I cannot tell you how many times our clients call and indicate that an employee has stated their free speech rights permit them to do all kinds of things, all kinds of things. And so this does come up a lot, and I'm sure some of you are nodding your heads, and we'll talk about that. Heated break room conversations, obviously that's going on more in your workplaces. I believe that was 59%. Keely will correct me if I've got it wrong, and I welcome it. But this is going on a lot more even than I would have thought is happening. And I guess it could have upticked due to, it being election year, presidential election year. Social media rants, General distractions and lack of productivity. A Washington Post study said that about a third of workers think their colleagues talk more about politics than work. Customer complaints about employee political views and lack of collaboration among those whose political views differ, which I think is very interesting and falls squarely, I think, into who we align with at work. And as far as leaders, all of us who we're bringing up with us, I think all of these things can impact our decisions, just like every other thing that we think and align ourselves with. So next slide. So the challenge, people's identities, and I would say this is more so, at least in my adult years, than it ever has been. And people that are my elders agree with me. Their identities are so intertwined with their political topics. Another challenge is political discussions in front of clients or customers. Leaders and managements bringing up politics to and even inviting candidates to speak in the workplace. Political divisiveness, which does put a strain on efforts at inclusivity. And that is largely because these have started to be tied to markers, not intentionally, but markers that also distinguish some of our protected statuses. So, what does an employer do? What does HR do? How do we foster a cooperative, productive, and inclusive workplace that doesn't discourage workers from having their own opinions, doesn't create a chilled workplace, or one that feels more like a dictatorship than a democracy? So let's talk about the First Amendment first. I hear it a lot, as I indicated. So it's important for employers to remember that free speech only protects people from having their speech limited by the government, not by their employer. There are some other things we need to think about in that context, but no employee can use freedom of speech as grounds for implementation or discipline of any policy that you have. Free speech does not protect any employee that is in the private sector from discipline, and for public employees, only in very narrowly limited circumstances. I work with a lot of human resource professionals, many of which are attending this presentation or come to our webinars. I've never known any HR or employer to ask me about disciplining an employee on the basis of their own personal political beliefs. It just doesn't come up. Typically, this free speech comes up when we're talking to employees about their conduct and disciplining. Keep in mind, South Carolina, as well as many other states, I looked before this presentation, and there are a number of states that have a similar statute to ours, which specifically says you cannot discharge a citizen from employment or occupation on the basis of their exercise of political rights and privileges. And of course, the statute in our state carries some misdemeanor violations, an imprisonment of not more than 2 years. I have no idea if any employer has ever been imprisoned for this. So it's a crime, and we can't do anything, exercise any sort of control or employment decisions, any adverse employment action on the basis of an employee's political rights or privileges. That's important, I think, to remember, to the extent that there might be indirectly impacting any decisions we make about our employees. So this does not mean, though, that employers cannot prohibit disruption in the workplace or engaging in political expression during work hours. And we'll talk more about that. And employers can implement policies to address discussion of political topics. Discrimination. So let's talk about that. That's this more nebulous world that we all live in legally. I'm not just talking about any other aspect of it, but legally. Although political affiliation is not a protected class under Title VII, it is not illegal discrimination in and of itself, but a lot of times there are intersections with a political opinion and a protected class. such as race, such as gender, abortion and gender. Um, so political conversations can cross the line into religious, racial, national origin, or LGBTQ plus conversations. And religion, race, national origin, LGBTQ, gender, all of these are protected classes. So the example, which I think is a pretty extreme one, and I would say that there are much more nuanced ones that could be become evidence of it, if not discrimination, harassment in any EOC or SHAC litigation, SHAC claim. But the example, my manager discriminates against Hispanic Americans because of his comments about Trump's executive orders on immigration. So I would say that some of the topics that I hear when we're doing trainings or when employers are talking to me about concerns would be religion in the context of politics, i.e., abortion, um, engaging in prayer at work, and religious rights and First Amendment rights associated with religious rights and exercising religion at work. Race, a lot of folks tie, whether they should be or not, race and certain political aspects. Some of the examples would be remediation or, reparations. National origin is the example we gave. It's a good one in regards to all of the discussions about the wall and immigrants and immigration. LGBTQ plus, that has become incredibly politicized. Religion and LGBTQ plus often conflict, and you can have um, employees objecting on the basis of religion that that an employee's practices of gender identity use of the restroom violate their religious beliefs. I have had employees ask me about this in trainings, and conversely, LGBTQ plus employees exercising the right to use the restroom that they identify with, which was SCOTUS's 2020 opinion, and their rights being violated by people who are harassing them and commenting on it um, in regards to their religious beliefs or whatever beliefs, whichever beliefs. So it can become a problem, and I think it's a quagmire. It's a difficult world for human resource professionals to manage this because it is, as I said, so nuanced and so easily it can slide from gray into a problem, gray area into a problem. But these are things that you have to think about and keep your ear to the ground about. Off-duty political speech and social media activity can potentially and violate employer policies against harassment and discrimination when your employees are engaging in any sort of communications off-duty or on social media, and it's directed towards other employees that would run afoul of Title VII. So it's important to keep up with that to the extent that it's brought to your attention. Next slide. Microaggressions is another area. I'm on the GSHRM, Greenville Society of Human Resource Management's DEI committee, and we've done 2 sessions on microaggressions for GSHRM this year. And I was assigned the politics microaggression breakout group. And believe it or not, there were a lot of microaggressions that the attendees in my breakout group offered in the context of politics. And so microaggressions is a great area, in my opinion, for human resource professionals to step into civility discussions with their workforce, and it would include in the area of politics. Politics is sort of a tangential area that doesn't necessarily implicate Title VII, and it would give you a great chance to start opening conversation and discussion with your workforce for the aim of achieving a more open but civilly minded workplace. I think a lot of employers steer clear of uncomfortable conversations at work for all the pitfalls and risks that might be associated with them, the minefields. And I completely understand that. Which is why I think microaggressions in politics is a nice, easy way to slide into the discussion. And it's an opportunity for your employees to realize that you really care about what they think, as well as informing some of the attendees, including leaders and managers, where they might be putting their foot in it and not meaning to. So, microaggressions wrapped into biases related to either political party can result in and morph into harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. Next slide. And an important thing to remember about microaggressions is, harassment, discrimination, retaliation claims that actually bear any liability against the employer are rare. And occur far less frequently than microaggressions, which chill the work environment and offend employees and good employees. A lot of employees develop opinions and positions and awareness on the basis of the workplace without ever opening their mouth and letting you know that it's a problem. Because as leaders, we're the decision makers. And so we don't often realize when our comments are falling flat or offending, or when other comments might be doing so that are made by other leaders. And what happens is this can cause us to lose really good employees. And they talk. And so this could also impact our ability to hire good employees if we get a reputation. So there's every reason in the world why a workplace, from even a business standpoint, regardless of other standpoints, which are just as important, but even from a business standpoint, would want to focus on how can we have a workplace that's more culturally aware and open and welcoming all different types of people, all different walks of life, people with different views, different backgrounds, different cultures, different political positions, all, and they feel honored and valued. There's just every reason in the world that a workplace would want to strive for this. So, next slide. Politics, politics, politics. There is a great article that I have linked at the end of the presentation. I hope it's still there. Written by Katie Navarra, and it's in the SHRM workplace. The SHRM News website. If you're a SHRM member, you can just find it on their website. How to manage political discussions in the workplace. I thought it was excellent. So I've just pulled a few things from her article for us to discuss today. But Ms. Navarra specifically says, if you ban political discussion from the workplace, this is yet another area where you're going to make your employees feel silenced, disengaged, and distrustful of leadership. We are all focusing now on employees feeling like they can bring their whole persons to work. And that's in politics, it's in religion, it's in everywhere. That's harder to manage. But society is calling for employers to do this. And again, as I made the point on my last slide, it only benefits employers to do so. So Katie Navarra suggests limiting misconduct is more effective than banning specific political discussions or comments at work. And I completely agree with that. And we've got some proposed policies for you to think about. Next slide. Navarra also says that you can engage in forums with your workplace and navigate political discussions and help them have constructive and considerate and civil conversations as part of a forum at work to initiate company dialogue, employee dialogue. Acknowledge that in this forum that the workplace is a place where everyone should feel safe, welcomed, respected, and included. And then communicate to the employees that the company doesn't want to limit healthy dialogue about social issues, including political ones, but it does have a vested interest in reducing disruptions and maintaining a culture of respect. And then encourage employees to engage in conversations along these guidelines, but to remember their conversations are an opportunity for better understanding, not changing someone's mind or finding common ground. I thought this was a very crucial point. So many of us, me included, begin a conversation, whether consciously or subconsciously, I'm wanting for that person to agree with me and to come around with to my way of thinking. And in truth, that has no value. That has no value in any discussion. Instead, just sharing our beliefs for understanding, but not pressing them and pushing them. And I will say that a lot of times when employers are calling me about issues that have arisen at work, it is because one employee is pressing their views on someone else. So that's a very important thing for all of us, including me, to remember. I'm not trying to change someone's mind. I am not trying to even find common ground, just having understanding. And sometimes I'm not even going to have that. So, more on the open forums and the training, facilitate hard discussions. And I would say start, if this is a new practice for your entity, start with the lowest hanging fruit, the most, the easiest ones to start with, the least charged, the least charged. You can use employee resource groups, groups that have the same thinking to facilitate constructive conversations among people who already have a shared experience. If you have those, if you don't have those, you can develop those and you can ask your employees what topics, what areas would they like to see in an employee resource group and then group them that way instead of you picking the topics and you picking what the shared experience of the employee resource group would be. Provide employees with the tools needed to express themselves in respectful ways. This is integral to any DEIB training that you're doing. And then have employee-responsive forums with the employees where they're encouraged to engage in healthy and respectful discussion, including politics, with an employer-sanctioned venue for open communications. So a safe place and a safe time. Next slide. During this, and really this encouragement is for all of us, but during these forums, it's important to remember we all have more in common than we think. We need to all avoid assumptions and labeling. Very easy for us all to do. We all do it. We all have biases on all sorts of issues, areas, and notions. And to focus on the people, look deeper than the surface, slow down, no quick judgment. And this requires intention and action. And I think in a forum of this nature, just stating these things, naming these things, help us all become more aware of these things, of being aware of, I have more in common with people than I think. I am given to making assumptions and labeling. I have biases on all sorts of issues, areas, and notions, but I need to focus on people look deeper than the surface. Demetrius Pyburn, who's on he's out on Army duty, National Guard duty. He started with us when he was in the Army and then trained to go to the JAGs for National Guard, but he's out right now. But I learned one of the most amazing things from him about this. Studies that had shown that all kinds of different people fighting wars in the trenches from all different walks of life came out dear and great friends because in the trenches they looked beyond the surface and learned more about each other and realized they had a ton more in common than they initially thought. Next slide. So it's also important that you train your managers. That would be different than how you train your employees, although the managers need that training as well. That the managers need to set conduct expectations for the team. And what I would say this translates to in the context of politics is managers don't need to express their politics to their team, in my opinion. Leaders probably shouldn't express their politics because everybody is concerned about disagreeing with leaders because leaders make decisions on the basis of employment, all the terms and conditions of employment. Managers should be trained to monitor employee interactions for charged exchanges and discipline the behaviors, not the opinions. And so they all have to be careful about how they communicate their concerns. And I would say they need to involve human resources in it because a lot of times managers they have so much else going on. They don't really have time to think how effectively to communicate what they need to communicate about the disciplining behaviors, which could unintentionally come across as disciplining opinions. Managers needed to be trained on de-escalation training. How can they diffuse a situation before they can get the employees to HR to discuss it. All managers need to be trained on empathy and listening skills and handling disruptions in the workplace, when to send an employee home, contact HR. In fact, I would say that this should be something that is woven into all managers' performance reviews and compensation and annual increases tied to it, because that's the only way we're going to get our managers on board with any DEIB or civility efforts that we have. And if we don't tie it to compensation, it becomes unimportant to them. And these are actually our boots on the grounds. They're the first line of defense we have for liability, employer liability for any violation. So I think it's integral that this be woven into what we expect from our managers. And also, the managers should understand that off-duty conduct laws may limit employment actions. So that's important for them to remember, as much as in regards to their employees as themselves. All right, so let's talk about some potential policies that you can implement in your offices or in your workplaces. So a lot of companies have civil discord policies. If you have one of those, you need to strike a balance to justify discipline of employees in necessary situations. And it should not be overly broad. In other words, it could impact the National Labor Relations Act, which prohibits an employer from taking any action against an employee if they are engaging in concerted activities, which simply means talking about the terms and conditions of their employment, which can include criticizing their employer, criticizing their supervisor, criticizing the workplace products and services, making fun of their employers, sharing information about wages, all manner of things. Concerted activity is broadly interpreted by the National Labor Relations Board. And that changes with influx of the executive office, but the National Labor Relations Act is broadly construed under the law. And it is important for us to remember that that applies to all of our employees, whether we're unionized or not. The other thing is, if we're going to have a policy, we've got to follow it, and we've got to enforce what we write. So we shouldn't write anything that we're not willing to enforce. And what's tough about these policies is discipline and enforcing of the policy does not tie to performance or production or meeting measures or metrics that are important to the financial well-being of a company. In other words, we could find ourselves taking some pretty strong discipline actions against our biggest producers. And we have to make sure that our leaders and our decision makers are in line with this. And if they are not, then we need to be really careful about what we write in our policy. We need to be careful about how we write, how it's going to be enforced, and maybe even make the policy a little broader and less specific. If we're going to have these policies and they're going to address political expression specifically, then we need to explain the difference between appropriate political expression and inappropriate political expression and provide examples of each. Now, my opinion is that if we're going to do that, that we don't do examples in the policy. We have a general policy, a general statement in the policy that says, this policy encourages appropriate political expression that does not interfere with work, blah, 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 but prohibits inappropriate political expression. And then have a training that rolls out this policy where there is discussion about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And the training becomes the safe space. You can use some of the Navarra outline for what's discussed in the training. The training is a safe space. No one's going to get in trouble for violating the policy in the training while we're asking what is appropriate, what's inappropriate. It's a great opportunity to have a full discussion of it. And oh, by the way, incidentally, indirectly, also working on civility and an open workplace culture. Next slide. Prohibited political activity. So here are some suggestions of inclusion in the policy if you decide to have one. Certain activities you don't get to do while on duty. You can't demonstrate, count or recount votes, circulate petitions, solicit votes or contribution, conduct or participate in opinion polls, fundraise. You can't stomp. You can't do anything while you're supposed to be working. And truly, this wouldn't just be limited to politics, it'd be limited to anything. You cannot use our company equipment or resources. You cannot communicate messages that are inappropriate or offensive to coworkers or to customers or vendors. In fact, I would say you should have a policy that prohibits any discussion about political expression with customers or vendors. I would highly discourage that. With customers, the obvious reason is we do not need to allow our employees, none of us need to have those types of conversations with customers. With vendors, we don't know what sort of policies they have at their workplace that we might get in trouble with if we're doing that. We don't know what the vendor policies are like, so we don't want to step on it. And of course, we don't harass our coworkers with our opinions. This is a policy that Katie wrote. These are bullet points from it. Katie Busby, not Katie Navarra. Katie Busby in our office, a part of the employment law team. And I thought it was so good, I wanted to talk to y'all about it. And she certainly gets full credit for it and can write you one if you'd like her to. I don't think she's attending today, but kudos to Katie. It's a political activity and symbols policy. So this policy said participation in political and civic activities must be conducted on an employee's own time and should not interfere with work. Oh, Katie is there. Thank you, Katie. Employees may not use, display, or refer to any forms of political symbols while representing employer, attending functions on behalf of employer, or performing any job-related activities. The policy prohibits solicitation or distribution of literature during work time or in work areas. And solicitation is defined, including anything offering for sale, asking for donations, collecting funds or pledges, or votes. Katie, anything else that you would want to add about that? I don't think we have you on jumping on voice, so maybe drop it in the chat box if there's anything else you would share. But Katie's policy is obviously longer than this, but I pulled some of the highlights from it that I thought were very interesting. Oh, here's Katie somehow speaking.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yes, amazing. Magic. That's magic that you just popped in like that. That's a marketing thing. I have no ability to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think I have really anything else to add, but yeah, just to reiterate, I think, in drafting these policies, basically they shouldn't be doing any of these things at work. They need to obviously be focusing on their work. And that's not to limit their political expression, but it's a distraction to their coworkers. And so that's really probably should be part of the focus of your policy.
Katie, I want to ask you too, if you don't mind staying on a little bit more, let's have just a small discussion about the symbols, because some years ago, I did have a client who wanted to prohibit employees wearing any symbols on t-shirts. They could wear t-shirts to work, and they wanted to prohibit symbols on t-shirts, symbols on hats, because they were having too much argument amongst their employee population on issues. And I would think that things have only gotten worse to that effect. So did this policy, I can't recollect, did this policy attempt to address any sort of symbols being worn on garb, any sort of garb to the workplace?
Yes, so we did say, and this was requested by a company, or I think this was actually, I think we did this for a private school, if I'm remembering correctly, the most recent one, but I think they were having an issue with people wearing t-shirts and hats and certain things to school events, their staff. Or to school. And so, yes, this policy did say that, you shouldn't be wearing any kind of political symbols while working or while attending work-related events that are used to represent, a political party or a candidate, that kind of thing.
Oh, I think that's a great idea. I think that's a great idea. And I think that, would be specifically important for a school. So anything else you would want to add, Katie?
I think that's it for me, but I'll stay on it in case you got anything else.
Great. Well, thank you for your cameo and unrequested, so surprise appearance on our webinar.
Yeah,
But y'all go, I'm sorry.
I said I'm happy to do it.
And keep in mind, Katie's glad to help you draft a policy as well. So you could even expand your symbols policy to be any symbols. You could also, if you are a workplace that has your own symbol, you could say symbols other, the only allowed symbols are our symbols. But this particular employer decided no symbols at all because there are so many areas. There's a lot of strife and discourse in society, and it comes out of society into our workplaces always. Employees do not leave their opinions at the door, and right now everybody is highly opinionated, and we have been for several years. And so you could actually have a symbols policy that extends far beyond political activity if you think that would be beneficial to your workplace. I know many workplaces prohibit, for example, the Confederate flag or that being worn as a symbol or even displayed on vehicles. You could prohibit religious symbols. You could prohibit all sorts of things. That does not mean that we're denying people's rights to come to work as their full selves. An outfit, a t-shirt with a religious slogan is obviously different than a cross, that they wear. So there's a line between what's okay, what's not. Reading the Bible at work, having a Bible on your desk, those sorts of things. So whenever we talk about this, people always bring those things up. There's nothing wrong with that. But maybe on outfits, on clothes, if we had a general rule that you wouldn't wear any symbols at all, and we would list all of the categories that applied to, then that would be an equal application of our policy. And unless there's some need in your workplace that would be requiring these symbols, there's no reason to have them. Then otherwise, I don't know that there's any harm caused. Now, again, we never give advice on these webinars because they're specific to entities. So I'm saying something generally. I'm not giving specific advice. And, point being, this policy that Katie prepared was for a school and it made perfect sense for the school. Everything depends on the workplace, the business, as well as the employee population and what's best for the worker. Next slide. The best policy of all, if you want to capture everything, would be a disruption of the workplace policy. Earlier I talked about a civil discord policy where you weren't sure if the leaders would back enforcement. Here's a way to have a policy that's broad enough that even the leaders from the most productive employee would have no problem having this enforced. And it's one that disciplines an employee for interrupting or disrupting the work of others for any reason. I put some language that I include now in codes of conduct when I am asked to review a code of conduct that's going to be an employer handbook. Disrupting business operations, engaging in antagonistic conduct of coworkers, inciting discord at work unreasonably, although I don't know whenever there would be a reason to incite discord, engaging in negativism, gossiping, sabotaging, or communications to the point of causing distress to coworkers or disrupting the workplace. I think that these are all good things to add to your code of conduct. And this doesn't actually require you to have a separate political expression policy or any sort of policy about any type of expression. And it also permits the employer to engage in the forums that we're talking about civil discord, civil conversation, civil communications, open workplace about DEIB, politics, really anything of any nature. So when in doubt, if you want the broadest and simplest thing to implement, a disruption of the workplace policy probably is the best route to go. Although, please do remember, according to Navarra and according to the initial graph that we saw, that having a workplace where employees realize it's okay and they're safe to communicate how they view things and bringing them whole selves to work, bringing their whole selves to work without trying to, keep a part of themselves back, as long as it's not disrupting the work that they're doing and they're not interfering with other workers and their abilities to do their job. That's still the ideal, as long as we're not running afoul of our other policies. So I have not looked. We've got 4 chats. Let's see if anyone has a question. So Stuart Lawrence says, in a diverse workplace with various ethnicities, what are the best practices for ensuring that a single language is used during work? For instance, names can be difficult to translate, and conversations may include mentions of your name or a political candidate's name, talking about you or politics without your knowledge because you don't speak their language. That's interesting. That's a very interesting question. Katie, I'm going to get you to think about that one while I answer it, and then maybe you can weigh in, because I don't know that there's any one way to answer this. First of all, when I see something that says ensuring that a single language is used during work, what I get concerned about is if we are hiring employees whose primary languages are different than English, and I'm assuming, and forgive me, I'm assuming that English is the language that we're talking about. But if we hire employees whose primary language is not that, then we, number one, have a duty to make sure that all of our employment white paper is also in the language of the employee that's been hired. That's handbook, that's everything. And communications with the employees have to also be in the language that they is their primary language. Now that, I think, would be on a sliding scale on the basis of whether we have hired folks who have a command of the language, the primary language that's spoken in the workplace, or not. If they have a full command of it, that's a different issue. But I think we have to be careful in those communications with the employees. That would be something we'd want to discern after we had hired them. And we would want to make sure that we don't need to have a translator present. We have to remember that an employee in that scenario is glad to have the job and doesn't want to do anything to discourage keeping the job. And so we have to be very careful of how we communicate this so that it won't come across as something that might interfere with their ability to continue their work with the company, and therefore be national origin discrimination, discriminatory hiring practices, and or just discrimination with an existing employee. And so that's careful. You got to approach that very carefully with the employee. I would always have a witness present for that. And the conversation would be more, can you tell me, is there anything that we want to make sure that you have everything you need to succeed here? Is there anything that you need in regards to translation or any assistance of that nature? It won't interfere with your ability to work here. We just need to make sure that we're giving you everything you need to understand and succeed. It's very dangerous to have these types of conversations. I'm even making myself nervous, but it is important that you do communicate with employees about in the language that they understand. Now we get to names that can be difficult to translate, and conversations may include mentions of names. Let's start with names difficult to translate. That's a tough one. I don't think it's absolutely national origin harassment or discrimination if people have difficulty translating names. I think it is important for leaders to make an effort to say an employee's name as it sounds and it's supposed to be said. I just think that's important. I think we are stepping into microaggression area, and it's an opportunity for us to make the employee feel welcome. So I think that is something that leaders should strive to do. So that's including supervisors. Other employees and coworkers never should make any crack about it, any jokes about it, and should do the best that they can. And the employee themselves, if they decide they're going to shorten their name or nickname it, that's up to the employee. But I don't think the employer should ever touch that. I'm going to welcome Katie's thoughts on that. And what I'm confused about this last bit of the question is, conversations may include mentions of your name or a political candidate's name, talking about you or politics with without your knowledge because you don't speak their language. So hopefully we are not having conversations about employees who don't have our language, and where there are conversations ongoing about them and their politics. That it would be harassment at a minimum, and depending on who's making them, could lead to discrimination if it also impacts changes in their job duties or any terms and conditions of employment, even if they're not related, the changes are not related to the discussions. So, Katie, I welcome any input you might add. You might be sorry that you agreed to hop on and join me for this, but you are very, very smart. And so I want to hear your input.
I don't think that I have anything else to add to that one, Chris. I think you covered everything that I would have said there as well. And if that person wants to follow up, I also was maybe a little confused at that last part, but if they want to put in the chat something extra for us to consider, we can take a look at that too. But yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add on that one.
And that was actually a really, really great question. I appreciate that because it gave us an opportunity to discuss a lot of things. I appreciate that very much. And it allowed us an opportunity to get a little bit further into this issue and as well as other issues, but this issue. So the next question, what about those who are deaf and use sign language? Again, same answer. And I'll tell you, I've had some experience in dealing with that from several different angles, not in our own workplace, but for clients. And I would say the same thing applies. So if you are hiring employees who only communicate by sign language, you have to be able to provide them with communications in sign language that they understand. Now, a lot of employees are able to read, right? And so this won't cause any harm or this won't cause any trouble for them. They can read. But to the extent there are meetings that employees attend, and that there is, it's all verbal communications, that I think you have to have an interpreter present. And again, I see this as an opportunity to show not only to the employees who are deaf, but also to the entire workplace that you are an open workplace and you respect everybody, all walks of life, and you're welcoming them. I see that as a great opportunity. Doesn't take much. There's a lot of really great interpreters, ASL interpreters in the upstate area, I know for sure, that would come in and do this. And you're sending a fabulous message to all walks of life, not just those who are deaf in your workplace, if you have that present when you're having these communications. All right, so we have an explanation about the prior statement, the prior question. Using their language to talk about others or politics so that they do not know what they are talking about. All right, so I'm thinking, Lawrence, you're meaning, I think Lawrence would be your first name, and I'm now making an assumption, and forgive me, that you might be referring to people who are not speaking the primary language in the workplace, and they are talking about those who do speak the primary language. I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but I will tell you regardless if correct. Yeah. So that's harassment. They've got to stop it. It could be harassment. We don't actually know what they're talking about, but we don't want people coming in, just like we have to communicate with folks in their language. If these employees have English and they otherwise have no problem speaking in English, and that is the language in the workplace, and they've been hired with that understanding, then there's no reason why they should engage in those types of discussions during work. If they want to engage in those types of discussions outside of work or on their breaks, that's different. And you could even have, I guess, an employee resource group with this shared experience and allow them to meet and use your location for that on their own time. But otherwise, engaging in these types of communications during the workplace, the workday, they're disruptive. That disrupts the workplace, and that's not okay. And I think definitely as a human resource professional, you can sit down with them, always with a witness present, somebody taking notes, and the note taker dating and signing them, and explain, look, just as we would not permit this in English in a way that you could not understand it, that's not allowed here in a way that we're not understanding it, because you're using our names, you're using names of employees, and you're discussing politics in it. And I think I would leave it to the names of the other employees. I'm not sure I'd get into the politics too much because without knowing exactly what was said, you don't know if you're stepping on the political expression statute or if you're getting into Title VII issues. And so you could probably ask them to share more about what these conversations are about and determine whether or not you need to do anything further. But truly, if everybody else doesn't understand them, then we don't really have to worry too much about people being harassed yet if they don't even understand what the comments mean. You could, I think, start with, you don't do this. You don't talk about other employees in front of them using their name in a language they don't understand. Katie, anything to add?
Yeah, I agree with all of that.
All right. All right. Well, that was interesting. I think that's all of the questions, and we will be finishing a little bit earlier unless anyone else has any questions. So I will say pop to the last slide. I don't think I have any more slides. Please, everybody go out and vote. I know everybody on this webinar will. And thank you so much for your attention and your participation, for coming today. Thank you always for participation in our webinars. It means a lot to us when you show up. We love doing these. The next one we'll have is in November, and it'll be a week early because Thanksgiving. And we're going to discuss religion in the workplace, as well as cover some religious microaggressions as part of our training. So join us. I think that's November 17, Keely. Is that right?
Oh,
Did
sorry,
Keely
I
escape?
was on mute.
Is it November 17?
I
Our
think it's
next
November
presentation?
21st.
Thank you. See, me and dates. So the Thursday before Thanksgiving.
Yes, 21st.
All right. I hope everybody will come. It's going to be great. It'll be right in time for the holiday season where a lot of religious microaggressions happen. So everybody have a great rest of your month, and go out and vote, and let us know, as always, if there's any topics you would like us to discuss.
Thanks for joining this webinar presented by Haynsworth Sinkler Boyd. To learn more about the firm and its services, visit hsblawfirm.com.